Motorhead Garage, presented by DragonfireTools.com, is brought to you by AMSOIL, the first in synthetics, Shade Wagon, throw some shade, and by DragonfireTools.com, industrial workbenches with integrated tool storage.
Tapered wheel bearings. You have roller bearings. We also have ball bearings. Now these things have to carry an immense amount of weight, both axial and radial, up and down, side to side. You better have a fluid that's up for the challenge. Welcome to this AMSOIL Tech Tip. We're talking about bearings, specifically axle bearings. Well, what does that mean? That means in your axle somewhere you're going to have some bearings. I'll show you on the table here, but this one actually has a bearing here on the outside. This is an axle bearing out here. It supports the axle out here, but a lot of times they leak. So the fluid not only has to lubricate all of this, it has to go out here and lubricate those bearings as well. Now that could be a pretty tedious job if you have to change them, so you want to try to avoid that in the first place. To do that, well, you have to go inside the differential. And to go inside the differential, you have to remove the cover. Once you do that, depending on your axle design, you may have to pull a C-clips out, or Ford, sometimes you just slam them from the outside. You don't have to go in there. But this one, you have to go inside of there and actually remove this little C-clip. That's the only thing holding your axle in. Then you can go ahead and pull the axle completely out. I told you it's a pretty big job. You have to have some specialty tools. Once you have that out, you can go ahead and put the driver in there. Once you put the slide hammer in there with a couple of good blows, you should be able to knock that bearing out. Now, once you knock it out, just check your differential, make sure it's in good shape, and then you'll use a driver and you go ahead and put it back in there and make sure that it's already seated. Once you do that, you can replace the seal. Like I said, that's a pretty big job. This axle here has bearings here on the inside and the outside. Len, to do all that work, I'd like to avoid it in the first place. How can we do that?
Well, you can use a decent gear lube to start with. Something that we do at AMSOIL very well is our gear lubes. We've got different viscosities for any of the different vehicles. As these vehicles continue to search for fuel mileage, we're finding that the gear lubes are getting lighter in viscosity, and that makes the job that much more difficult because the fluid is inherently thinner. Thin is not necessarily great when we're dealing with all of the pressure and heat that's developed by a differential. So you have to make sure that you're building it properly. So good film strength, good base oils, proper amount of additive to make sure that it's resisting oxidation.
Yeah, you're doing the axle bearings, depending on the axle itself, and all the way on the outside, so it has to move as well.
Right, it's got to move in all temperatures, right? It has to be thin enough to move in the cold, but thick enough to protect in the heat. So it's kind of, you need the best of both worlds. You have to understand the application and then formulate properly.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Axle seals going bad, well, that could be a huge hassle. We're talking about a damaged differential, brake shoes, pads are all ruined. Why not keep them protected with the best differential fluids and so many other awesome products? Just go to AMSOIL.com.
We now turn our sights to Oklahoma. That's where we find our PaintedAutoParts.com Motorhead of the Week. It's Cheryl Kyler, and Cheryl has one of the finest examples of a fourth-generation Camaro you will ever see. She had a '79 Camaro, but when she met her husband Fred, he sold it and bought a pickup truck. Cheryl always wanted another Camaro, and they finally bought a fixer-upper about 10 years ago. Fred tinkered with it, and he slowly brought the car back to life. Out went the 5.7-liter engine, in went a 6.0 from a Cadillac Escalade, and the seats, they're from a WS6 Trans Am. The wheels are from a Z06 Corvette. And get this, all of the striping and lettering on the car was done by hand. No decals on the car at all. Fred put it all together, and by that time, he told Cheryl it was too late to repaint the car, but she really wanted blue, so Fred did what any good husband would do. He had it painted blue, and he surprised her with it. And things like that, well, that's how you stay married for 42 years, folks. Cheryl Kyler is our PaintedAutoParts.com Motorhead of the Week with a little help from husband Fred. You can be the next PaintedAutoParts.com Motorhead of the Week. Just send us a note at MotorheadGarage.tv. We shall return with more Motorhead Garage presented by DragonfireTools.com. See you in a few.